What is up, everybody? This is JP with jpfitnesspro.com. Here in a couple weeks, I'm going to have probably about 3 to 4 hypertrophy and 3 to 4 powerlifting programs up on my website. At the very latest, it's going to be maybe 2 months before I get them all up and going. But hopefully before then, I at least have a few of those up on my website. I'll also have options for customized training plans if you want something completely customized for you, and then some online coaching options available. Again, that's going to be at jpfitnesspro.com, so please keep checking back there in the next couple of weeks. As you can tell, for this episode of the Exercise Science Podcast, I actually have notes for this one, so I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often. My dumbass actually figured out how to get to screen capture with my video editing software, so that's actually really cool. So yeah, as the better I get with this, with editing software and stuff like this, I'm gonna try to bring you guys better videos. So obviously, I figured out how to do screen capture, so I am gonna have notes for this video if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, or if you're watching on YouTube and you're driving, or you're watching from my website because you downloaded the podcast, you could also get my podcast free for download on my website. Or you're watching this on SoundCloud and you cannot see the screen right now with the notes. It's okay, because I'll explain in as much detail as I can the notes that I've written down, so you guys aren't like missing out on anything. But I thought I'd do this so for the people who are watching YouTube, you guys aren't just staring at a static screen. So it makes it a little bit more neat and easier for you guys to follow. Today's episode is going to be about periodization, and I don't want to say beginning periodization because there's a difference between basic periodization fundamentals and then a beginner periodized program. But basically, it's just the basics of periodization and what makes a good periodized program. So I'm going to start with that, and obviously, since this is part 1, I'm going to have more in-depth episodes of the Exercise Science Podcast on periodization later on. Today, I'm just going to go over the basics of periodization and also the basics for hypertrophy and strength. Again, I don't delve too much outside of hypertrophy and strength, since that's kind of like my niche. That's what I like researching, and that's a lot of my videos are on. So yeah, I'm just going to stick to those two and basic periodization for those two concepts. Okay, let's start out with what is periodization. What is it? How do you define it? Periodization is defined as the planned manipulation of training variables, loads, sets, and repetitions in order to maximize training adaptations and to prevent the onset of overtraining syndrome. Basically, you're manipulating the variables that were stated so that you see specific adaptations over time. Obviously, you cannot manipulate the variables and keep them static, don't change anything, but as you can tell, eventually you're going to hit a plateau and you're going to have to change something for you to continue to see adaptations, basically to get closer and closer to your goal. The benefits of having a periodized program and not just walking in the gym and doing whatever, these are the benefits that I came in that are a little bit more easier to understand, is when you have a periodized program, you have a clear plan to reach your goals. You know what you need to do on a specific day, you know what you need to do specifically that week, and you know whatever month you're in, you know exactly what you got to do. You know when you're going to deload, and you know when you're going to test your 1 rep maxes or 3 rep maxes, or whatever it is you're testing. You know when you're going to test. So I like having a clear-cut plan. I like seeing what I'm going to do. Another benefit of having a periodized program, or just having a training plan in general, is to prevent overtraining and injuries. A lot of the times I see people, there are usually 1 or 2 ways that people go. They either aren't training hard enough, they're in the gym, doing stuff way too lightly, not at high enough intensities. They never train heavy, they never train at high RPEs, and I'm not saying you need to always train at high RPEs, but they never train at high RPEs. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where people train, they just train too high of a RPE and at too high of percentages of 1 rep max all the time. They're going in there balls to walls, just training hard day in and day out, and again, that can have an opposite effect too. So again, you can either overtrain and get injuries, or have overtraining syndrome, or not train hard enough and then just never see results, or the results you want to see. So having a periodized program is going to lay that out for you on when you need to increase RPE, when you need to increase percentages of 1 rep max, things like that. So you make sure you see proper adaptations without under or overdoing anything. Another one that doesn't get as much attention, and this is a big one in my opinion, even though it doesn't really get talked about a lot, is that when you have a periodized program, there's a lot less confusion and a lot less anxiety when it comes to working out. From personal experience, and you may have seen this before, I've seen people come in and test a 1 rep max either every workout or every week at least. Once you're past the beginner stage, you're not going to be able to hit a 1 rep max, a new 1 rep max every week. Definitely not. And if you're training a 1 rep max every single week and you're testing yourself every week, you're going to have fluctuations in that 1 rep max. 1 week you may get it, 2 weeks in a row you may not. The next week you may get the same. And this can lead to a lot of like anxiety of like, oh, am I going to hit my 1 rep max this time? And things like that. You just may not know if you're going to improve. You're not tracking improvements as good as you can. And then confusion too. You may think, well, what am I supposed to do today? When am I supposed to go up in repetitions? And when am I supposed to train heavy? Things like that. So having a good program laid out for you over a long period of time, which is periodization, reduces confusion and anxiety when you go into the gym. And then a big one too, the last benefit that I could think of for periodization, which obviously there's a lot here, but is to avoid plateaus and spinning the wheel. If you don't have a periodized program and you don't know how to manipulate volume and intensity, you're just going to be spinning the wheel for a while, which means that you're not really going to be seeing any progress. You're going to be you may see progress run 1 month, but then you may de-progress. You may go backwards, and then you may go forwards, and then you may go backwards. Really just doing a wheel, kind of circling, where when you look at, these little forms of progression and de-progression, you don't really get anywhere. And then which just basically means you hit a plateau. And then plateau doesn't necessarily mean you're stagnant. You're doing the same, you're hitting the same 1 rep maxes. You could be doing, like I said, spinning the wheel. You may improve 1 month, but then the next month you may actually go down on a 1 rep max because, again, there's not proper planning. So those are the benefits of periodization, and why I think that it may sound like a corny quote, but if you're failing to plan, you're basically planning to fail. If you don't have a plan when you're going into the gym, where are you headed? There's no kind of end point. And I don't think there should be an end point for working out, but I mean, there's no point to test yourself to see if you've improved. Now that we know that periodization is good, what are like the fundamental principles of a periodized plan? Like, what are general things you want to see inside of a long-term program? The first one we're going to go over is that your program should manage volume intelligently. Workout volume is how much work you're doing throughout the week or how much work you're doing in a day. And a lot of the times you may see this calculated as reps times set times weight. Now, let's give an example. Let's just say you're doing 16 sets on chest. Now, do you do all 16 sets in one day? Do you do all 16 sets over a period of 2 days, which would be 8 sets and 8 sets? Or do you do that 16 sets over 3 days, which is 5 sets, 5 sets, and 6 sets? Now, there are multiple ways you can do that. As you can tell, and you may see a recurring theme with periodized planning and planning a program, is that there is almost always, there's not one set in stone way to do something. Yes, there are general guidelines where the scientific literature has shown time and time again that are better than other ways to do things, but there's not one specific thing usually that you do. So, but a good program will manage volume intelligently over a day, over a week, and over the coming months. You don't want to stack all volume on one day, or you just want to be able to manage volume intelligently. And then another example of not managing volume intelligently, and I see this sometimes too, was don't work muscle groups on like the back-to-back days, on concurring days. Like, I'll see people do weird splits where they'll do back and triceps, which I'm not saying is a bad split, but they'll do back and triceps, but then the next day they'll do chest and biceps. That means 2 days in a row, the first day your triceps are getting hit. Well, your triceps are getting hit, and then your biceps are also getting hit from doing the back exercises. And then the next day, you're hitting triceps again when you do your chest and shoulders, but then you're also hitting biceps again by doing biceps directly. So one day biceps are getting hit indirect, the next day they're getting hit directly. the day before triceps direct, and then the next day indirectly. So you're not giving your triceps like a break, or a lot of muscle groups right there are just overlapping, and you got to think of like overlap and where to put that volume. So basically, a good program manages volume intelligently and where to put things. Another good sign of a good periodized program is that intensity of 1 rep max, like a percentage of your 1 rep max, and intensity of effort, which would be RPE, rating of perceived exertion, should be balanced with volume and how much you do. And by that I mean and that kind of goes to what I see with people when they do work out, is that a lot of times that if you have a high volume program and you're working with high intensities of 1 rep max and high intensities of effort, then you're probably going to be on the path to overtraining really soon. And even if you're not overtraining, there's going to be a point where fatigue is too high, to the point where you're never going to see that in performance. You're never going to perform the way you want because fatigue is too high. Yes, your fitness may potentially be really high, but because fatigue is high, it's masking that, and your performance is going to go down. So again, you need to manage intensity of percentage of 1 rep max and intensity of effort. Those things need to be kind of counterbalanced with volume. If you're doing a lot of work, your intensity or your RPE probably shouldn't be at the 9s and 10s or even 8s. If your intensity of 1 rep max is high, you probably shouldn't be also having high volume, like doing a lot of work in the gym. Yeah, you could, but again, you're gonna overtrain, get to an overtraining state pretty quickly. There was a study done by Brad Schoenfield and colleagues where this was a few years ago, where they and we'll go over this in the hypertrophy in a little bit, but they did a study of a group who trained like the typical powerlifting way, heavy basic movements, squat, bench press, deadlift, with I think it was around 3 in that 3 to 5 repetition range, with longer rest periods and heavy weight. And then they had another group kind of train like the typical bodybuilding style, 8 to 12 reps, 1 minute rest periods. But they equated volume between the two groups. Both groups had the same increase in muscle mass over time. So they had the same increases in muscle mass, but the group that trained with the powerlifting style type group, even though they had the same muscle mass, they also got stronger due to, the principle of specificity. But what was not really surprising, but what kind of applies to what I'm trying to say here, is that the group that did the powerlifting style, even though volume was equated, and even though they trained, they gained strength, the one thing that they could say, and this is anecdotal, but it still says a lot, was that they felt burnt out at the end of the study. They felt really tired, fatigued. They really didn't want to do anymore. And the group that did the bodybuilding style training, they felt like they could do a lot more. They didn't really feel fatigued, nothing like that. And again, the reason why they didn't let them do anymore was to equate volume between the two groups. But what I'm trying to say is that when you have intensity really high and intensity of effort, RPE, and percentage of 1 rep max high, you're not going to be, you can probably get a lot of volume, but when you get too much volume in, and try to, get all three high, volume high, RPE high, percentage of 1 rep max high, you're going to eventually get burnt out. So you got to balance these. A good periodized program has these balanced. The next fundamental of a good periodized program is there should be deloads in your program. And I rarely see this implemented in like people who just kind of walk into the gym. There's never a point where they deload. And yes, maybe in a very novice periodization program, like a workout program, there might not be deloads because you're not working at higher RPEs. There's low volume throughout the week. But the second you get past the beginner, and that's not even for all beginner programs. Some beginner programs still do have deloads. But the second you get past beginner programs, you're going to have deloads in your program. The reason why you have deloads is because typically before you test, whatever you're testing, typically it's some form of strength or repetitions, maximal repetitions. Fatigue is really high due to, higher intensities or higher volume. And when fatigue is high, it affects performance. And you deload to minimize fatigue. You see all those positive adaptations from the training block or from the mesocycle you just did, and then boom, you set PRs, hopefully, and that's the planned goal, is to break a personal record. But deload should be implemented in your program. And then the last thing that's like a general fundamental principle, and again, this is even used less than deloads. This is probably the least common thing that I see, which again, I've been guilty of before, which, I've tried implementing more into my program, is that at intermediate and advanced stages, when you're maybe a trainee who's doing a program with very high volume, is to have intro weeks. Basically, when you're coming off of a testing period and then you're redoing your training cycle with, new weights, you want to have a week where you do half volume that kind of reintroduces you back into your training cycle, or whatever the beginning mesocycle of your training. The reason why you do this is due to the repeated bout effect. When you do exercise day or program multiple days in a row for a few weeks, you've probably noticed, and this is in a very simple way, think back to when you first started a workout program, the first week of that program that you did. Maybe you took a layoff and then you started working out again, or maybe it was the first time you've worked out ever in the gym. You were probably really, 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 really sore the next couple of days. Like, it was probably hard to move, hard to sit if it was a leg day, hard to stretch. You just felt really sore. But then after the next coming weeks, you didn't get that soreness anymore. And again, that's the repeated bout effect, is when you do a workout day more than once, after a couple times of doing it, you just don't get sore anymore. So having an intro week with half volume and slightly lower intensity to whatever mesocycle you're going in is a good idea, because again, due to the repeated bout effect, you're spent less time recovering and you're spending more time kind of building muscle than you are. Again, there's not a ton of evidence for this, but again, just theoretically it makes a lot of sense, and there is a little bit of evidence for it though. All right, now that we got the fundamental principles and the bits of hypertrophy, now we're going to go over like basic principles of periodization for, I'm sorry, I think I said hypertrophy. I meant now that we got the fundamental principles and benefits of a periodized program, we're going to go over the basic fundamentals of periodization for hypertrophy and strength/powerlifting. I put powerlifting here because obviously it falls under strength. It's just strength, getting strong in 3 particular lifts: bench press, squat, and deadlift. So we're going to start with hypertrophy first. What causes hypertrophy? It's an increase in muscle size when the body is subjected to sufficient mechanical stress. And what types of mechanical stresses can we implement to cause some form of muscular hypertrophy? And those 3 things are mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. Now, I do have to make a note on this first, is that these 3 things have been touted to cause muscular hypertrophy, but so far the only one that has been able to cause muscular hypertrophy independent of the other 2 is I think it's mechanical tension. Because, and again, I think because scientific literature isn't super in depth on answering these questions yet. But basically, they've done studies on metabolic stress. They've metabolically stressed a muscle with no mechanical tension, and there's been no increase in muscular hypertrophy. And to my knowledge, the same thing with muscle damage either. If you do damage to a muscle, but there's been no mechanical tension, there's going to be no increases in muscular hypertrophy either. So when there is mechanical tension involved, i.e. lifting a weight, then these kind of are like, when there's mechanical tension, sufficient mechanical tension, that you will see increases in muscle mass. Same thing with metabolic stress. Metabolic stress is kind of the opposite of mechanical tension. When mechanical tension is high, there's little metabolic stress. But when metabolic stress is high, again, that would be like low weight, high repetition work. Mechanical tension is low. But when you remove the weight that you're using, metabolic stress with no weight involved in the muscle tissue, there seems to be no effect on hypertrophy at all. So for mechanical tension, which again is direct, weight, is the thing that without any other factor has increases in muscle hypertrophy. So now that we know that these 3 things cause muscular hypertrophy or have some effect to muscular hypertrophy, when you're thinking about implementing those things, once you have those things nailed down, hypertrophy in regards to periodization, you want to have, for rep ranges, you want to have a wide variety of rep ranges. Hypertrophy can be seen in a wide variety of rep ranges, just like I just talked about. High repetitions, low weight would be metabolic stress, and then heavy weight would be mechanical tension, and then obviously moderate rep ranges would be a moderate of both. So even though you can see, you're able to see a hypertrophy with a wide variety of rep ranges, I personally recommend also doing that, training in a wide variety of rep ranges, but mostly in the 6 to 15 rep ranges. Because once you have the sufficient stress part down, you're going to see hypertrophy. Well, someone may ask, well, okay, well, I'm working out with sufficient mechanical stress. I'm working with, 80% of my 1 rep max, and I'm, going to a 7 to 8 RPE. Is that it? Just do a few sets and I'm going to keep growing? Well, no, eventually you're going to plateau and you're going to stop growing. So, what you need to do is you need to intelligently increase volume over time. So again, I'll go over the first thing first is you can train in a wide variety of rep ranges, but I recommend the 6 to 15 rep range for most of your work. Well, why is that? Because that 6 to 15 rep range, if trained at a high enough RPE in percentage of 1 rep max, yes, that's a sufficient mechanical stress, but you're going to plateau, and what determines, what do you manipulate after that to keep seeing results? Is you need to manipulate volume. So a good periodization program intelligently increases volume over time. And again, the work you're doing has to be sufficient mechanical stress. You can't intelligently increase volume over time of work that's, for example, if you're in low RPEs of 1 to 4 RPE, and then you're on low percentages of 1 rep max, you're not going to see optimal, or even you might not even see any increases in hypertrophy depending on your training age. So once you have sufficient mechanical stress, and then of one of these 3 things, and then you have you need to implement intelligently increases in volume over time, which again we'll get into in later videos and get more in depth into that. But again, periodized programs, good periodized programs for hypertrophy know how to do that. Like, for example, the program I'm running right now is just a block periodization, which each week, starting from the beginning, each week I add sets to the muscle groups that I'm working. I add 1 set each week. And then I keep doing that until the 3rd week. And then on the 4th week, because I'm kind of hitting my daily cap on the amount of volume I can hit, I split my days from 2 days per muscle group to now 3 days a muscle group. So I'm splitting the volume up over from 2 to 3 days at that 4-week mark. And then from 4 to 6 weeks, I start adding more sets until I get to the 6th week where my frequency and volume is highest. And then from there, I go in volume and I increase intensity. So again, that's me managing volume and intensity over time. So again, that's me gradually increasing volume intelligently. I'm not going to sit there and from week 1 to week 2 add 5 sets on a muscle group. That's a lot of volume to add in just 1 week. So again, I'm trying not to make this too complicated. To sum it up is you want to intelligently increase volume over time. And then also too, another good key for a hypertrophy periodization is that you should have, and I guess this will be more of a programming thing, is that to have a wider variety of exercises. A good program over the course of months is going to have a wide variety of exercises in it. So, and that would be for hypertrophy. Because think about it, if you have, let's just take a bicep curl. Let's say you do a standard bicep curl and you're trying to grow your biceps, but you never introduce any other form of bicep curl. A muscle is going to see an adaptation for a specific exercise and where there is specific types of tension. If you're doing a dumbbell curl, the middle point of a dumbbell curl, when your arm is 90 degrees or where your forearm is parallel with the ground, is going to be the hardest part of that exercise. Your bicep is going to grow and adapt to that specific range of motion where it's hardest. So during a bicep curl, there's not much mechanical tension at the very bottom and the very top of the movement. So muscle fibers that are maybe contracting more at the bottom of the movement aren't going to see as much growth as they would as if the mechanical tension was highest at the bottom. So when you have a wider variety of exercises, and then also like another example too, let me give you another example, is that that doesn't include range of motion, is that when you're doing a regular bicep curl, you're working the biceps, the regular biceps and a regular range of motion. But let's just say you don't ever do any other variation of curl. Now someone else also introduces hammer curls into their workout program. So they're doing regular curls and then with the supinated grip, and then they're also doing hammer curls with a neutral grip. So they're also working their brachialis on top of their regular biceps brachii. So they may have the better, fuller looking bicep than someone else who's simply just doing regular bicep curls. So to an extent, a wider variety of exercises is better for a hypertrophy program. So to sum up these 3 points that I went over is you want to have a wider variety of rep ranges, because muscular hypertrophy can happen at a wider variety of rep ranges with heavyweight, moderately heavyweight, and lightweight. I guess the one caveat there is if you're going lightweight, high repetitions, you do need to get near or close to failure. If you're doing lightweight, you're not getting close to failure, you are not going to see the same gains as you would as if you went to failure compared to lower rep ranges. But I recommend doing most of your rep ranges, most of your reps in the 6 to 15 rep ranges. Why? Because it's, from my perspective, and there hasn't been a ton of research on this, but from my perspective and just looking at it, is that it is the best way to accumulate volume over time, which is the next point. You want to intelligently increase volume over time and then also have a wide variety of exercises in your program. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated for you. Sometimes I have a problem with making things not so complicated, and it doesn't, it's not a way to sit there, and I'm not trying to make it complicated. I'm just sometimes not the best with words. So let me know if you have any questions about that in the comment section below. Okay, next is strength. Okay, so periodization for strength. The first thing to understand is that you need to think of strength as a skill. It's not like hypertrophy where hypertrophy is like just a stimulus from what you're subjecting your body to. Strength is an actual skill. Knowing something can help you in a like, for example, we'll take a squat. Knowing something in a squat, just simply getting more information can actually help you in a squat. And so there are multiple things that happen with strength that can help you get stronger, but it's good to think of it as a skill. Now, the 3 things that make up strength, and the first one is what I just said. It's skill acquisition, getting better, and we'll use a squat for example again, getting better on the squat. For example, getting tighter during the squat, having better breathing, being able to brace against your weight belt if you use it a little bit better, having better foot position for you, controlling the eccentric portion of the squat, going down on the squat, keeping consistent range of motion during the squat, keeping consistent speeds, again, having the same setup from workout to workout so things don't change. All these things play into it, but just getting better at the squat itself is going to help you get stronger. The next thing is neurological adaptation, and by that I mean is that an easier way to put that is you need to get stronger, and this might sound stupid and redundant and obvious, but for it to get stronger, you need to lift heavy. You need to lift heavy weight. And this is different from skill acquisition, because you could have someone who's really skilled in a squat. Let's just say they have a picture perfect squat, but if they may never train heavy. They may train only more than 15 repetitions, but someone else who has a picture perfect squat but trains heavy is going to probably be stronger than the person who doesn't ever train heavy. So let's just say we take a clone of yourself and a clone of you, so everything's the same genetically. Let's just say you have the same diet and everything. One of the clones of you trains with a squat, but like I said, always trains over 15 reps, and the other trains the squat and you train heavy. The person who trains the version of yourself that trains heavy weights with the squat, you test 1 rep maxes, is you're going to be stronger than the version of yourself that is training 15 reps and higher. Again, this is different from hypertrophy, and the fact that hypertrophy can be attained with a variety of rep ranges. With strength, because it's, again, think of it as a skill, to get better at heavy squatting or heavy lifting, you need to lift heavy. Again, it sounds ridiculous, and of course I need to lift heavy, but again, a lot of people don't actually think about that, and it's basically the principle of specificity. All right, the last thing that determines strength, and I guess one thing to note is these things that I say that determine strength, they're not the only things that determine strength. These are just the things that pertain to a program. Things like sleep, muscle moment arms, lever length, nutrition, all affect strength too. There's dozens of things that affect strength, but these three things are just they pertain to programming. So the last thing that we're going to talk about with strength is muscle mass. Is that once you have a good skill in the squat, and again, you can use any exercise, but we're just using the squat here. Once you're adequately skilled in the squat, and then you have been training heavy, which is adaptation, the last thing that determines it is muscle mass. If with all else equal, the more jacked person is going to lift more. Using the clone example I used for earlier, if you have two clones of yourself, you're both skilled in the squat. Let's just say you both lift heavy, but one of you has somehow implemented a part of your periodization to adding muscle mass. The version of yourself that's more jacked is going to lift more. And I guess we'll go over these bullet points right here is in a little bit, but yes, the person who is more jacked of the clones of yourself is going to be able to lift more. So again, those three things make up strength when it pertains to programming. And how does that apply to, your periodized program? Basically, exercise frequency for the lifts that you want to get stronger at should probably be higher in your program. And that's different for hypertrophy. For example, squat, bench press, deadlift. Those are the three things that a powerlifter needs to improve upon and try to get strong at. They need to do those, in my opinion, and again, a lot of the scientific literature shows this, that you should probably do those more in your program than someone who's strictly looking for hypertrophy would. Increased frequency of these exercises means that you can get skilled faster at them and that you can work on your skill a lot more. When you lift heavy at something more often, which again, we talked about volume determines the magnitude of adaptation. When you do something more, that the magnitude of that adaptation increases. To an extent, obviously there's a point where this is going to get worse or you'll start overtraining. But the more you lift heavy, the better you'll get. Again, there's a cap to that, but that's always a good rule of thumb, is that if you want to get stronger or better at something, just add another set, and that could definitely work. And again, that's skill acquisition. Another thing, and the next point that's good for strength periodization is that for gains in optimal strength, again, it may sound obvious, but at some point in your program, you need to lift heavy. And to get a little bit more specific on this is that you need to lift heavy in percentage of 1 rep max, but you need to lift heavy in RPEs at some point during your training program too. Obviously, the weeks before you hit your taper, when you're getting to the higher intensity portions of your program, you should probably be approaching near maybe 100% 1 rep maxes on your lifts, your main lifts that you're going to be testing, and near 10 RPEs. So if someone ended with 95% for a 3 or a double at or whatever it may be at a 9 RPE, or 8.5, 8 RPE, somewhere around there, that would be good because they're getting really specific to what they're trying to do. Again, so you got to think about RPE, and because again, when you're testing 1 rep max, it's going to be obviously a high RPE, and it's going to be near 100% of your 1 rep max, or if not your 1 rep max. All right, the last point to go over for strength is that for periodization is part of your program should be aimed at gaining muscle mass. Bigger muscle fibers equals more force production. So unlike hypertrophy, with hypertrophy gaining muscle, if your goal is to gain muscle, you don't have to lift heavy. It is wise to lift heavy because the stronger you are, the more loads you can lift, the greater loads you can lift submaximally. But with strength, so you don't need to lift heavy to gain muscle, but for optimal strength gains, again, needs might be an unnecessary word, but I mean, it's for optimal strength gains. I would say you need to focus on gaining muscle at some part of your program. At some point, your skill acquisition and your neurological adaptation, which is lifting heavy, is going to have very diminishing returns, or at some points during your program, it might be hard to sit there and find out how to get better in a lift. So it might just be maintaining your good form, but the one that's kind of guaranteed, and it's still going to slow down over time, but the one that's kind of guaranteed is just getting more jacked. The bigger the muscle fibers, the more force production. So part of your program should be aimed at getting more jacked, gaining more muscle mass, which again, we went over just a little bit ago on a hypertrophy. So would be to somehow increase volume over time. So part of your program should probably be in that 6 to 15 rep range. Not all of it, because you still need to have heavy lifting, being someone who wants to focus on strength, but some of it should. And then, more advanced forms of periodization have specific mesocycles aimed at maintaining strength, not increasing and maintaining it, but increasing volume, so you're gaining muscle. And then maybe the next mesocycle may be at using that newfound muscle mass to increase 1 rep max loads, or just getting stronger. So those are the basics for strength periodization and hypertrophy periodization. And obviously all those will fall after the fundamentals from the principles of a periodized plan, which I went over at the beginning. If you guys have any questions, please post them down below. Again, I try not to make this too complicated. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm trying not to go too in depth, but it's hard not to when this can be a pretty thorough topic. I am going to have future videos on each hypertrophy and strength individually for periodization. So if you guys have any questions, comments, recommendations for other future videos, let me know down below. But until then, I'll see you guys next time.